Hello, and welcome to another video from Ritual Woodcraft. And today, we're going to carve an industrial-sized wood spoon. I was given this spoon by one of the world's foremost authorities on fermentation and gut health. This is an industrial-sized spoon, one that was used in a commercial kitchen. It's made out of segmented bamboo, but look, it's coming apart. There's a piece missing. It sits a long time in a stock pot sometimes. And that's a lot of heat for most glues. So being made out of segmented bamboo is a pretty good environmental move. But I don't think it's the best choice for a spoon. Now our guts, and obviously I'm an expert, our guts are our immune system. Our microbiome is our immune system. And if we keep our immune system healthy, we stay healthy. How do I know? I'm a geezer and I haven't had a cold in over 10 years. And the gut authority that I listen to is the real food devotee. Because real food keeps us healthy. We truly are what we eat. And the real food devotee just happens to be my wife. She's on her second decade of building good health with good eating habits. And she's helped hundreds of people regain their health. She has thousands of clients here in the Southern California area. She serves the Hollywood elite, but she can serve you too. Her food is delivered to your door. So check out her website and see if the Real Food Devotee doesn't have something that inspires you to eat real well. But now back to the business at hand. A spoon. We're talking 80-quart stock pots here. And this spoon needs to be strong. Look at this one. It's just a straight shaft of wood. Doesn't have much of a curve to it. Doesn't even have much of a bowl to the spoon. So we can make one like this because this straight-handled spoon is for the power stroke. It'll hold up as long as it's not made out of glued strips of segmented wood. We'll make it out of a solid piece of wood, and to that effect, I happen to have a piece of maple here. It's 1 inch thick, and it'll be more than enough to make an industrial-sized spoon. Now, you don't have to make an industrial-sized spoon. You can adapt the techniques that I'm going to show you today to any size spoon. I normally carve much smaller and graceful spoons, and I call my wood carving technique grain carved spoons because I tend to follow the grain in a piece of wood, and I can come out with a spoon in almost any shape. Sometimes I make very delicate and pretty spoons where the art of the design is paramount. But remember, we're making an industrial spoon today, so strength is paramount. Regardless, the tools and the techniques that we will use today are pretty basic, and you can adapt them. And I've been making spoons a long time. I've made hundreds, and I've taught dozens and dozens of people how to make their own spoons. So you can look at some of my other videos on my channel and see for yourself. But the techniques that we'll learn today are something you can easily adapt to make any kind of a spoon that you want out of wood. So give yourself a couple hours and you'll be on your way to mastering the techniques needed to make beautiful wooden spoons yourself. Let's get started. So look at this piece of maple. It has beautiful grain, but it has different types of grain, and what we want to do is to choose the portion of this piece of wood that will give us the strongest spoon. But we can make it beautiful at the same time. Look at this knot right here. If we flip this board over, that knot is relatively placed directly underneath what we saw on the other side. So it passes straight through this piece of wood. Now imagine these concentric circles in the bowl of a spoon. If we brought the handle straight down this way, we would have grain crossing the handle like this. and that could be a weak point. But if we brought the spoon down this way on this piece of wood, we see that the grain here is much straighter and linear as opposed to the handle. That'll make a much stronger spoon for us. So we'll begin quickly and simply by placing this spoon right on the section of wood that we want to use. And remember, we want to utilize this linear grain, so we're going to position it like this and drop the center of that knot right into the center of the bowl of our spoon. And then let's simply begin by tracing the relative shape of this spoon. Now, with almost half the bowl missing, we'll flip it over to try to get a symmetrical shape to begin with. Symmetry is not that important. You can work with the grain and the piece of wood that you choose and follow that grain and the patterns within that piece of wood to make a spoon that's not only functional and strong, but very beautiful. And seriously, this is an industrial size spoon after all, right? It's going to be used for industrial purposes, right? So I think it might just need an industrial size bowl. So I like something more like this. And don't worry if you can't draw it as accurately as you want right now, because the process that we'll use will help this spoon become symmetrical as we go along. We'll give it a good thick neck right here. Maple's a very hard wood, and it'll be a very strong spoon. And we're going to actually make the handle a bit longer. Why? Because we can. And I'm sure it'll be appreciated when it's dipping into these 80-quart stock pots. They are huge. This one has a hole, so maybe you can just hang it up somewhere. And we'll certainly add one of those to our spoon. But don't take these lines so seriously now, because this is all subject to change as we build it. Now, while this is going to be a huge spoon, the piece of wood is even a little too large for this one. So we're going to cut away some of the waste. But what we want to remember is we want two straight edges right here, because we're going to lock this into a vise while we carve out the bowl of this spoon. And we want a nice stable platform for the vise to hold tight. So we'll lock it into the vise, and this is exactly why we gave it two straight edges for the vise to bite into. We're going to hammer and chisel on this piece. And to that end, we're going to want to better define the areas around the bowl. And to help you to easily see it on video, I'm going to use a Sharpie. You don't have to, you could just use pencil lines. I'm going to draw the outside shape that I'm aiming to get. Notice how I said aiming to get. And I'm going to draw an inside shape as well, but I'm going to leave a good 3/16 of a margin, just so I have lots of room to play with. This is the area between what I'm going to carve away and what I'm going to leave as the edge of the spoon. And the reason we'll leave this area will become very evident to you as we go along. So this is the area that we're going to gouge away. And by gouge away, I mean we're going to use some gouges. Whenever you're carving wood, especially hardwood, it pays to have a good gouge or chisel with a very sharp edge. So the integrity of the tool and the sharpness that you give the edge are what's going to make this frustrating or satisfying for you. We can take a mallet and just begin. We use the rounded edge of the gouge and the bevel on the outside to allow us to dig into the wood and then use that bevel to come out. So we're basically going to start working around the perimeter just to get a feel for the piece of wood. This is very satisfying. You'll enjoy this. I think it's the most enjoyable part of carving out a wood spoon. And you can see we're trying to come in a little bit deep, but we immediately lower the handle of the spoon and begin to shallow out. Remember, we're only working with a 1-inch thick piece of wood here, so the spoon's not going to have any more depth to the bowl than 7/8 of an inch. Can always go deeper, but it's a little hard to add some more wood back on. And I'll let the video speak for me as far as what I'm doing. I think it's clear enough you'll be able to see. Start in at a steeper angle and then lower the hand as we plow through the wood. And this is just our first layer in. Each time I come in and make a consecutive effort to dig into the wood, I'm staying with inside this inner line, and I'm trying to go on the ridge of the scalloped edges that the curve of the gouge leaves. So I'll start right on the high spot and come in like that. You can see what we're accomplishing. And you're learning the piece of wood in this stage. As you carve it with the gouge, you'll find that maybe coming in along with the grain right here is very simple and easy, and it gives a nice smooth cut. But later on, when we get in to where that knot is and we're coming across circular grain, it might be a different story. You can hear the sound. We're gaining more and more resistance from the wood itself as we get in close to the center. But that's okay. This really isn't about strength. We're not slamming the mallet against this gouge. It's about sharp tools and finesse. We can take smaller and smaller chips and still end up with the same result. I'm trying to be mindful to give the bowl some form of uniformity as I carve it. And that simply means what I do on one half, I try to replicate on the other. It's not an exact science. It doesn't have to be exact. We're carving a spoon out of wood, a natural material. and it's going to have a natural and organic look, feel, and practicality to it. Okay, just the knot area is remaining, and we'll come at that now. We might have to come from all directions. If we find that we're seeing chip out or meeting too much resistance in any one direction, we can go to another direction. Right here, we're meeting a lot of resistance. You can hear the resistance. The wood fibers are their most dense right around this knot. But at the same time, let's look at and appreciate the concentric circular pattern that the grain is making here within the bowl of this spoon. If you can see it, it's going to be beautiful. And our bowl is already taking shape. We can see it. But we're only in about 1/8 of an inch at the deepest point. And we have a long way to go. But do remember that the deepest point is what you need to bring every other part of the bowl of the spoon down to in some sort of smooth fashion. So when you run into resistance of grain that actually tears out fibers of the wood, they create a deep spot that you'll have to get under. That's nothing to worry about right now. We're near the top surface of the wood. But once we're down close to the bottom, we want to give that a lot more consideration. Notice that I'm beginning my dive into the wood a little further away from the line. You see how I attack these radial grains in a radial manner, circling around it, carving in towards that center. What you don't want to do is dig into the wood and then push down on the handle. You can even hear that because it can tear away wood and create tear out rather than a smooth cut that the blade of a sharp gouge will give you. This is freeform design, and the way you make your spoon is up to you, totally. I like to come in a little more shallow from the tip and maybe from the handle. I come in a little quicker on the sides. I want to give a little bit of depth to that bowl, as much as I can when we're working with a 1-inch thick piece of wood, so that if you're trying to sample a liquid or dish something up, you can get a good portion. You want to watch that you don't dig in the edges of this gouge or any chisel that you use, because they can make a line into the wood that's much deeper than the area you're trying to carve out. And that could become a problem as we get down deeper towards the bottom of the bowl. So use the middle. We have pretty good relief here already. A nice bowl shaping up. And we can approximate the depth of it. You can see we're already at the depth of the original spoon that we're trying to replace. And we're only 3/8 of an inch deep into this 1 inch thick piece of wood. And I do want to go deeper because I want to add a little bit of a sweep to the bowl of this spoon. Taking less aggressive cuts in and around the tight circular grain in the center so that I can get smoother cuts. You can feel right through your gouge how it is slicing through the wood, and you'll know when you're getting a smooth cut and when you're not. The grain patterns are going to be beautiful. We have a pretty nice bowl here. Easily as sufficient as the bowl in the original spoon. Look at that flat bottom. This was probably just sanded out in one move by an industrial sanding device from a flat 3/4 inch board, if that. That's an industrial spoon, but that's not how we make it. We make it by hand. This isn't some spoon you can buy at Charlie's Kitchen Appliances or Walmart. This is a spoon that you carve, and it's a practical, working piece of art. The closer we get to our final depth and finishing, the more attention we want to pay to the symmetry of the bowl. It's not going to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to happen organically, and because it's a natural thing, it's going to be beautiful. When coming in this direction or this direction, you can always take it out of the vise and turn it around so that you can continue to work from this direction. I always tell my new students, keep your hands away from the direction that you're carving anywhere in front of the gouge or chisel, because these things are made to cut hard wood. Imagine what they can do to your hand. And when you see me coming in this direction towards where I'm standing, know that I'm not hammering on that mallet. I'm tapping without enough force to drive it into me, even if it should slip. But I'll tell my students, it's a good practice not to carve towards yourself until you're very sure-handed with the chisel and mallet. And that'll come quickly, because the wood teaches you exactly what to do. You can see it, you can feel it, you can hear it. Listen to the wood, and the wood will teach you. When you get a good carving, you know it. When you get a bad one, you'll know it. You're not powering through the wood. You're carving through it, letting the tool do the carving. The tool does all the work. You are a guide. And the best guide follows the wood. Don't fight the nature of the wood, work with it. And that's an excellent life lesson. If you fight nature, you may think you win a battle every now and then. But creating a war with nature, you're going to lose in the long run. Again, we are a part of nature. Work with nature. And not against it. You can see tear out right there. It's shallow, but you can understand what I'm talking about. When you get down towards the bottom of the bowl, everything I carve around it, if it's not down to the depth of that tear out will still show. So we have to take everything else down to that level. The tear out came when I went in this direction, so I learned, and I came from this direction. And it didn't happen. But that's on this side of the knot, and it might be a different story on this side. When you get to these tight circular patterns, you have to work around with that pattern. But the level of beauty that they'll add to this spoon is well worth any extra effort we might have to put in. We're not down 7/8 of an inch yet. We're barely more than a 1/2 inch. But this is as far as I want to go on this spoon with the gouge. Now, a lot of people like this scalloped effect, and it does have its own inherent beauty. But I'm trying to make a smooth bowl in this spoon, and it's a lot to do with keeping the spoon clean. And in a commercial environment, it needs to be clean. We don't want the health department to get excited by scallops. So we'll work at smoothing this out. This hard maple is too resistant to carve by hand. In a softer wood with a sharp gouge, you can actually force it through the wood, but you can see here, it would be a long sentence. So we're going to move on to a different tool. It's a carving tool as well, the scraper. This is a metal scraper, and you may know this tool. You may have used it. But do you know this version of it? Look at the nice radius, the round edge. This will help us in smoothing out this bowl. It'll be a tremendous help, in fact. But there's an art to sharpening a scraper, and it would be a great benefit to you to seek out some videos on how to do this, because it's so much different from scissors or a knife. You work with a flat edge and the burr, so it's a completely different technique for sharpening, and like any other carving tool, the sharp tool will make all the difference. You can see I'm getting some shavings here, not too unlike what you might see if you had a little plane. Shavings are good, better than crumbs. A sharp scraper will give you shavings. And just like working the chisel or the gouge, we got to learn to work with the grain. If we go against the grain, we might get a rough surface. If we go with the grain, we'll get a smooth surface. Don't worry about knowing what to do. Remember, the wood is going to speak to you. The wood will tell you what to do. Now watch how quickly some of these scallops will be worn down by the scraper's edge. Look at that. We're getting there quick enough. Now we're going across the ridges right here. And when you do that, there's always a danger that you'll ride up and down, up and down, up and down, and you won't mitigate the ridge. You may even increase the depth of the little valley in between the ridges. And in that case, you look for the flattest curve edge that you can use and go along the ridges like this to wear them down. That way, the edges will register on the high points and carve only the high points away until you get down to the valley in between. You can see here, the areas that the scraper has touched are lighter than the darker area that it hasn't. I'm going to have to turn the direction I'm carving as the grain turns. See this rough area? That's from this direction. So let's try it in another direction and see what happens. We're still getting rough, and that's fibers of wood pulling out. Not as bad as when we came in that direction. So let's try it in this direction, across the grain. Seem to be getting more. Let's try it in this direction. Oh, that feels smooth. You can feel it right away. Could a change in direction really make that much difference? Yes. And if you notice, I lean the scraper into the cut. Not like this. Into the cut so that the edge is working. And look at how much smoother it is already. This doesn't take a lot of time. It's very satisfying because you're working with your hands and your fingertips. Everything that the wood is telling you translates right up through the scraper and you can feel it. It's a wonderful way to work. This is a very formidable carving tool. These ridges that I was speaking about, I'm going to go against them in a way that I can take the high points off and get as few tear-outs or as smooth a surface as I can going here across the grain. Let's see how that works. A broader edge is better because it'll be less likely to fit in any of those little valleys. We're cutting away at the high points now. I'm not using any tricks. You're seeing how this carving works as we go in real time. But it almost seems like magic. Look at that rough area there from going in that direction and this direction. And that direction to some extent, but I'm trying not to go in these valleys and up these ridges because I want to mitigate them. I don't want to exacerbate them. So I'm going across them at an angle. And I can feel that I'm getting less tear out, and we can see it. And we're reducing those ridges. You can always just use sandpaper, though, if it's something that we're unable to scrape without getting a rough surface. Rough in that direction. Smooth in this direction. Can hear it. Can see it bites and resists, but in this direction, you can hear more of a carving noise, and it moves smoother across the surface. Looking pretty good. Abrasive sheets, sandpaper, they're a carving tool as well. But this is our best bet right now. We can start with a 60 or 80 grit on the sandpaper and remove a lot of wood quickly. But this is going to be the easiest on our fingertips at this point. There's a deep spot right there around all these smooth spots. I have to take everything down to the deepest spot. If I want it smooth, it doesn't have to be smooth. But I want this one smooth. When you make a spoon, it's up to you. Do exactly what you want. Now this has a shape on this side that's obviously different from the curve on this side. So if you're looking for symmetry in your bowl, and we're pushing along like this over here, we want to flip that and use that same shape over here. See what we're doing? See scallops up here, we haven't touched this spot. Just shows you how far we've come everywhere else. No. Better. Still rough. Right there wants to go this direction. Probably from the apex of that curve. From the apex this way. Nope, we're still getting some right there. Even when the wood is talking very quietly, we have to listen. Let's see. Every direction so far. Ah, this is it. This is actually downhill on the grain. If this were the top of a mountain and these lines were the topography of the terrain, this would be going downhill. And that's why the wood likes us going in that direction. This layer, or ring, grew on top of this one, right from the center. So this one grew on top of this one, and so on and so forth down. So we're cutting, and we're not coming up and trying to lift the fibers. We're going down across those fibers. We're getting a pretty smooth bowl. So for time's sake, on the YouTube video, I may be speeding some of these segments up tremendously at times. But it's all going to be there so that you can see what we've done. I want you to see how we've made progress on this bowl and how smooth it is relative to where we started. You can still see some ridges here. They're slight. You can see a tiny little deep spot right in the knot. Some chip out there. And the rough area we just made up there. We're going to work with sandpaper to smooth out the rest. And this is how we'll sand. We'll take a piece of sandpaper here. I have a 60 grit, and I'm going to tri-fold it. That just makes it a little thicker, a little more rigid and resistant to bowing. And that's in case we do have any subtle ridges or scallops left. We'd rather they ride across the high points and not into the low points so that they reduce the high points until it's flat. So we'll use it like this with our fingertips, not pressing too hard. Too hard, it'll just follow every nook and cranny, and we'll smooth out exactly what we have rather than reducing the hills and smoothing out the hills and valleys. So we'll use it with a little pressure, and the better we can spread that pressure across it, the better results we will get. It'll go pretty fast. Like I said, sandpaper is a formidable carving tool, just like a scraper or a chisel. It's hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny little sharp particles that are like individual blades. You can see it work, and we'll do this all around the bowl of the spoon till we're satisfied with how smooth it is, till we get what we want. I've gone through the 60 grit and then to an 80 grit. And you can see we reached a pretty smooth result here, but it's still 80 grit. You can see the scratches in the wood. What we've done is we've almost completely eliminated the inside line, but we haven't come past the outside of the outside line because we're out of wood right there. We have extra here, here, and here, but we're out of wood there. If we go past that point, then the profile from the side, we'll start to see a dip in the spoon. It won't be that exaggerated, but the more we sand this edge, all we're doing is taking wood away from the top layer, and it will go down. So we're going to stay away from that. We're going to go to the bandsaw now and trim away as much of the wood as we can that we're not going to use. Now, you can do this whatever way possible. If you have a bandsaw, I think that's an excellent way to do it. But you might have to use a coping saw. Whatever tool you have, and you can get rid of the bulk of this wood that we won't use. Get rid of it now because it's faster than carving it or sanding it away. As I work to remove the bulk of this wood that we don't need, and like I said, I'm going to do that on the bandsaw, I'm going to show you what I'm trying to achieve. This is the deepest part of my bowl, and I've measured it. It's not even 5/8 of an inch deep. That's the lowest point right there. So this line represents the relative shape of the inside of the bowl, and this represents the wood that will be left over. So I want to cut away this wood. I'll remove some of the wood from the handle, but I want to leave at least a good 1/2 inch for strength. And I'll try to taper it as smoothly as possible, but a lot of that will do with some carving and some sanding. But this shape, of course, I can cut out relatively closely on the bandsaw, and that'll save me a lot of work. When I do cut these sections away, these lines will be gone, but I can redraw them, or you can when you do yours. Just know where you're at and work out the relative shape that you want. Everything will be fine. Remember, it's easy to cut wood off. It's a little more difficult to add wood on. So we're going to get close to these lines, but stay on the outside of them. starting to look like a spoon. I've got a seat here where I can be at eye level with what I'm doing so that I can keep an eye on everything. This is an 80 grit belt, and the belt sander is made for sanding fast. So we can get a lot done quickly, but we can make mistakes fast at the same time. So you want to move cautiously with this. If you haven't used a belt sander before, you take notice of the rotation of the blade. You work with it, letting the belt contact the wood on the downside and exit on the upside. In other words, come at it like this. If you go at it like this, you can dig an edge and the belt will throw your piece. And if you're able to hang on to it, you'll get away with just a terribly scarred piece. But other than that, it could toss it across the room and break it. It's 80 grit. It'll remove a lot of wood, and it'll also remove knuckles very fast. So you don't want to contact anything solid as far as body parts are concerned with this sanding belt. It's noisy. I'm going to turn it on and show you. You can get away with that a few times depending on how thick-skinned you are. But you'll not get away with that, not even once. So be careful. Don't have on jewelry. You can take away most of the value of a gold ring with a simple touch against the sanding belt. Don't have anything dangling from your wrist. Don't get your hair and don't get your clothes caught in the belt. Good advice for anything that spins mechanically with a high power motor. Let's go. On a long straight handle like this, it's better to go in a linear motion as smooth as you can. You might be tempted to try to round it off like this, but you're going to get wobbly ridges if you do that. Try to go in smooth linear strokes, and you'll be better off. We're going to use a scraping tool to carve the final shape into this, but we're going to remove a bulk of the wood, the belt sander, at this stage. What I've demonstrated is the principle for hogging away wood on the handle. This is hard maple and it's a slow process. If you noticed, I've stayed away from this area. It's a little different of a process. We can work with the rounded shape of the belt as it goes around the rollers. It's helpful here, and that's about it. The rest of the time we're going to work with the flat plane, even on the rounded areas of the spoon. We'll work like this in a sweeping and rocking motion from edge to center and back out to edge. Edge to center and back out the edge. And from this side, edge to center. And that will give us a nice rounded shape. We're going to rock it and roll it. So let's rock and roll. And as we do that, we're nibbling away at this profile. But you'll notice we come up to this edge, but we don't touch it. We want to stay away from that line right now. So we'll rock it and roll it, but we'll leave a gap between that edge and the sanding belt. You can see what we're accomplishing. And this process, using a spinning abrasive, will carve away at the wood, trying to achieve the desired and beautiful effect of a rounded spoon that fits the bowl. You'll notice that these edges here that used to be straight from these edges are moving inward. When we do this side, it will move inward too. When we get this perfectly rounded, these two lines will meet in the middle. And if we were to round off the handle, and I'm not certain we would, these lines that are moving in this direction and this direction from the edge will also meet in the middle. And that's how you know that you're building some symmetry as you sand away at the wood. You can see this line here. It started on the outside edge and it's moved in a little less than 1/4 of an inch. And this line also. They'll eventually meet in the middle as we round this shape. Again, I may leave this flat on the top and bottom because I want to replicate, at least in some fashion, the spoon that they gave me to go by, and I want it to be very strong. Right now, this is a strong spoon. We could go to war with this spoon. See how this line has come all the way into the center, and this line, and they meet, and they run down the center. Here they spread out again, where it's still flat, where I haven't sanded any. I think I'm going to leave it flat there, and flat on the very center of the spoon, so that it can sit level on any flat surface. But we've taken away a lot of the wood now. We've given it a rough, crude shape that we like for our final shape. And I think we'll do the rest with scrapers and sandpaper. Okay, we have a spoon. We're trying to get smooth, rounded surfaces. And I'm going to recommend that we use a rectangular, straight edge, square if you will, scraper. The reason why, we can hold it in our hand, we can lean it into the cut, and we can use our wrist and even rotate the spoon to work it. Get smooth shavings. Work away at the shape in a very controlled manner. And we can effect a very smooth radius, because you can feel the blade of the scraper working into the wood, and you can watch the progress with each stroke. Look at these shavings. That's the way it's supposed to be. The cup of the palm of the hand is perfect for rounding the bowl. I begin with 60 grit. I'll move on to 80 grit, then 120, then 220. And with hard maple, you can easily go to 320, even 600, and get a surface as smooth as glass. When you get to 220 grit and above, you're really not removing so much material as you are polishing. But up into 120 grit, you'll be able to effectively remove quite a bit of material. So keep that in mind. Always check your progress. It's good to look right down the shaft to see how smooth it is. Check the symmetry of the bowl. And just enjoy yourself. We're moving right along. I drilled a pretty significant hole through it and then tapered the hole from both sides with this conical bit. And with 120 grit sandpaper, I sanded around the edges of the hole. I'm ready to go to 220 sandpaper, but our spoon is looking spectacular. Look at the grain. I can't wait to see it with some oil on it. See how the grains come together right here in the center? The linear grain in the handle will help it to be strong. And the circular grain in the bowl of the spoon is just pretty. I've gone through the 120 grit and the 220 grit and the 320 grit in my abrasive sheets, and now I'm ready to oil the spoon. I'm going to use a mixture of beeswax and mineral oil. Remember, this is for food service, so whatever you use to oil it, just see that it's food-safe material. Any oil that is edible will work to help preserve this spoon. I'll oil it and let this spoon, in this raw state, absorb all that oil. And as it does, some of the grains of wood will lift, and it might feel a little fuzzy later on. That just means it's asking for another sanding, and I'll sand it further with 220 and 320 grit. And then I'll oil it again and it'll be smooth. So anything that is left on this spoon that you're not completely satisfied with at this point, you'll have another shot at it in sanding it out after the first coat of oil is absorbed. It's only going to get smoother and better. It's this part where we apply the oil that you get to see the beauty in the fruit of your labor. Now this spoon is functionally beautiful because it is designed to be strong and long and huge for industrial use. But it's also beautiful because of the natural material that it's made of, and nature's beauty is shining right through. Now right there you can see some slight remnants of the Sharpie that I used in detailing the shapes on this spoon, and I'll have one more opportunity to remove those completely with the final sanding. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope it inspires you to make your own wooden spoons, to use the techniques that we've demonstrated here today and adapt them to whatever kind of wooden spoon you'd like to make. Consider subscribing to our channel and ringing the bell so you'll be notified when there's a new video. Thank you for watching. Remember, this one is for the real food devotee, so she can keep on stirring things up.